Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making millions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/hidden. Protect yourself now at aura.com/hidden.
Oh yeah, look at my life. Hey now, hey now, yeah.
Hey now.
Oh yeah, look at my life out here on the road. Oh yeah, look at my life. Hey now, yeah. Oh yeah, look at my life out here on the road.
Hey now. How you doing, friends? Welcome to Scott Fox After 9. I've been seeing your DMs come in for the last 12 hours, and I'm acknowledging I saw them, but no, I don't really know what to tell you. Yes, another member of Parliament has crossed the floor. A new Democrat member has crossed to the Liberals. That means that after the by-elections next month, Mark Carney will likely have a majority government that he worked out through backroom deals. He did not get it from the voters. And I know that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people listening right now. People wondering, how can that be? Why is that allowed? Isn't there a rule against that? What about democracy? I know. I've seen your messages. I understand exactly what you're saying, but I can't apologize for this broken system. We were supposed to have electoral reform. We could make things a lot better, but there's no political will amongst the government to do that, because it benefits the government right now. You bet your butt that if the roles were reversed, the Liberals would be screaming bloody murder. Floor crossing should not be allowed. There should be a by-election if somebody wants to cross the floor. I know they would absolutely be doing that, but they're not, because right now it benefits them. And when inevitably the tables turn, things are going to change. But for now, there is no political will to change it, and Mark Carney is almost certainly going to have a majority government. But one thing I would point out to you is it's a very narrow majority government. Lots could change. A couple of political appointments, maybe a member of parliament dies, has a health issue of some sort. Not that I want anyone to die, but you know what I mean. Things can change very, very quickly, not the least of which is opinion polls. You know, the polls right now are very hard for a lot of people to reconcile, because the polls say that by and large, a lot of Canadians are thinking about voting Liberal. If an election were held today, they would vote for Mark Carney. Now, is that truly because they think Mark Carney is doing a good job? Or is it just the circumstance people find themselves in? There's a lot of disenfranchised people out there, people who have become so frustrated with the system, they're not even paying attention anymore. I understand that. In fact, I see that a little bit in some of my download numbers. Some people are just taking a break. They feel overwhelmed by the political process right now, and they have checked out. And I think that that's sad, but that's a reality. There's a lot of people who are just trying to get by right now, too. They don't even have a whole ton of time to focus on the news because they're working their job. They're working their side hustle. They're trying to figure out how they're going to put food on the table and keep the lights on. And I understand that, too. Right now, there is a level of complacency, and that's why the polls look the way the polls look right now. If we were in an election, if there was something important at stake, yeah, people would pay attention. Another thing I'd point out about the polls, too, is they can change on a dime. It takes one issue and not even that much time for the polls to completely swing. People are very, very fickle right now in their political views. And I think that by and large, people on the right are pretty cemented in that they're going to vote right. They don't like this government. Many on the left feel the same way, but there's a big little chunk in the middle there that are called undecided voters, and they're swinging back and forth depending on the circumstance. People are very caught up in the day-to-day of politics right now, those who are paying attention, and little things change people's mind. For example, military action in Iran. The fact that people are looking around wondering, where's the million houses that they promised us? The fact that people are struggling to put food on the table and having to make tough choices like, is my kid going to be able to play baseball this summer? Is my kid going to be able to go in soccer this summer? Because I don't think I can afford it. There's people making decisions that they're going to need to start using a food bank. And those things have an incredible way of swinging polls very, very quickly. So my friends, if you're one of the ones who messaged me, who was frustrated at our electoral system, that another member of parliament has betrayed their constituents and crossed the floor to vote in a way that they said they wouldn't vote. That is the way the system works. It's allowed. We can talk about changing that, but that change is not going to happen under this government. So while that's one of those things that we're going to put a pin in for now, something we can't control, I want to talk about something else that I think all Canadians should pay attention to. And ironically, this is one of those things that I don't know if you can control either. I'm not quite sure what we can do because the Liberals have shut down discussion and debate on Bill C-9. I think Bill C-9 is one that a lot of Canadians should be concerned about, but I'm also aware, and this goes back to the level of complacency amongst a lot of voters. The government throws out a whole bunch of bills, and then they bury a whole bunch of things in there, and it leaks out slowly. As members of parliament scrutinize these bills and they find little things that were hidden in there, they try and bring it to people's attention. They want Canadians to know, hey, this bill that you thought was about this also contains that. When news comes out like that, and it's little dribs and drabs, it's hard for the average Canadian to stay engaged. That's part of the reason that I do what I do here every single day on Scott Fox After 9. I really just provide you information. I'm not trying to indoctrinate you, not trying to make you vote a certain way. I really just want you to have the information. And I think Bill C-9 is one of the ones that you should know about. Now, I could try and explain to you what Bill C-9 is, but I wouldn't do it justice. There's one member of parliament in particular that I think has done an exceptional job at trying to prevent Bill C-9 from becoming law. He is the member of parliament for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South. Andrew Lawton is his name. Yesterday, when the Liberals shut down debate on Bill C-9 because they're going to ram it through the House, and they've got the votes to do it, he gave a very impassioned speech. It was like 15 minutes long. Before I get to audio from Travis Dhanraj testifying about the CBC, I want to take a few minutes and I want to let Andrew, in his own words, explain why every Canadian should be very concerned about Bill C-9. Listen to this.
Much of what Bill C-9 does, such as criminalizing obstruction to a house of worship or prohibiting the display of hate symbols, treads over ground that is already covered by existing laws that have been unenforced for the last several years because of a failure of political leadership by the Liberals. But then you look at what Bill C-9 actually does that changes things. It creates a new definition for hate, which every witness who testified before the Justice Committee said was lowering the threshold, making it easier to charge people for the words they say than is the case now. Removing critical safeguards against overzealous prosecution. And then, of course, you have the removal of the religious defense. Removing long-standing religious safeguards for political speech. A decision that became especially significant when we looked at the transcripts of the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture's comments, that in his view, there is clear hatred living within holy texts that millions of people around this country read and cite and pray over from a place of love. But to the minister, he says there's clear hatred. And not only that, prosecutors should be able to, in his words, press charges against those who cite them.
Just going to take a little break here from Andrew just to offer a little bit of context here. Bill C-9 does do that. This was something that got discussed quite a bit when they were in the committee process. And let me give you an example. If there's a portion of a religious text, let's use the Bible, for example, and they decide that, or in that religious text, it says something about homosexuality being wrong or being a sin. Okay, a lot of people that read the Bible are probably aware of various places in the Bible where that might come up. What this does is that can make it illegal. Citing that could become hate speech. That's the way Bill C-9 is being interpreted. If you cite a Bible verse, you could be inciting hate. And now with these new powers that come in Bill C-9, you could be arrested for that. You could be prosecuted for that. You could go to jail for that. That's what's at stake here. That's the religious exemption that Andrew is talking about. You've likely heard stories coming out of the United Kingdom. They've already gone down this road. We're a few months behind the UK in implementing this law, but left-leaning governments around the world, they really want this one, and a lot of people believe it is to silence the dissenters. Over in the UK, people are being tracked down at their home by police, being put in handcuffs and taken downtown, being booked and arrested, being sentenced to jail time for things that they put on social media that now fall under the guise of hate. This is a serious thing. This gives unprecedented powers to prosecutors and to police officers. Here's a little more of Andrew explaining about Bill C-9.
That is why all of the declarations and claims from Liberals that they will protect charter freedoms, they will protect freedom of expression, they will protect religious freedom, why all of those claims ring so hollow. Because they have been abundantly clear in their language that they do not protect that. They do not value the role that faith plays in society. And I want to give a perfect example of why the Liberals cannot be taken at their word that they will protect charter freedoms. The parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Justice said before committee, quote, "Freedom of religion is already fully protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms." She said that to assuage concerns that Bill C-9 would lead to the further erosion of these freedoms. Well, does it sound familiar to you, Madam Speaker? It should, because Justin Trudeau said something very similar when defending the invocation of the Emergencies Act. He says, "I want to reassure Canadians that when the Emergencies Act is invoked, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to protect their individual rights." The federal court later determined that was a lie. The Federal Court of Appeal later affirmed that that was a lie. A government claim that it is protecting charter rights is not sufficient to actually protect those rights. And this is coming from a government that has a long history of censorship bills. And now on Bill C-9, when conservative members of the Justice Committee wanted to bring the testimony from people who are among the millions of Canadians of faith who will be directly affected by this, the Liberals have moved to the motion before us today to shut down debate. The Liberals are censoring debate on their censorship bill. The Liberals are denying us the opportunity to read letters from imams, pastors, rabbis, civil liberties advocates, individual Canadians who have been flooding members of Parliament's inboxes and voicemail boxes and phone lines with their concerns about Bill C-9.
That's true, by the way. I've heard from a number of people in the know that this is one of the number one issues that members of Parliament have had feedback on from their constituents, one way or the other. This is concerning. This is an erosion of our rights, and the government isn't even going to fully participate in democracy here by letting us debate this issue, by hearing testimony from key witnesses. They're going to ram it through. They have shut down discussion on Bill C-9. They're silencing Canadians, including faith groups and civil liberties advocates, who are sounding the alarm that our rights are at threat here. Bill C-9 restricts free speech. It could restrict peaceful protests. It could criminalize them. And it gives the government and police powers over speech that we don't even know the full extent of the power they've given themselves here. Bill C-9 is a major, major concern. And unfortunately, I feel helpless having to tell you this, but it looks like it's going to become law. I'm telling you this now because this is one that we need to watch. This is one that when we go to the polls again, if you feel strongly that it's not right and it's not just that this law is being rammed through, then you've got to vote accordingly. I want to, before I get to Travis Dhanraj, and I'm probably going to say that a few times in this episode, yesterday, Travis Dhanraj, former employee of the CBC, did testify before a committee in Ottawa. Before I get to his testimony about his experience in working at the CBC, there's something else I want to get on your radar. I am a real stickler for money. I'm a real stickler for expenses. In some of the many roles that I do outside of podcasting and radio, I'm in charge of other people's money because I am either the chair of a board or what have you. I supervise various different organizations and groups. And as the supervisor or the chair, I feel an inherent responsibility to make sure that money is well spent, that the people who donated that money, or in the case of taxpayers, we got taxed that money. I feel a responsibility to make sure that not only are my books wide open so you can see every expense, but I feel it's important for me to spend that money appropriately. You know, when someone's in charge, you trust them to spend the money appropriately. If I've got to give you money, you better be responsible with it. And that happens in so many different aspects of life. Well, when it's our government, they're in a position of trust. We trust them to be good with money. I don't think we're getting very good value for money. Again, I'm going to credit the folks over at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation who have crunched some numbers and done the hard work to go through many, many different expense accounts for various crown corporations. Friends, I'm here to tell you the amount of money they are spending at various crown corporations on food and booze is obnoxious. Let me give you a few examples. The Royal Canadian Mint, their board, spent $12,334 in 2025, including $2,500 at a steakhouse in Winnipeg for 15 people. The National Capital Commission, their board members in 2025 dined in Ottawa and Gatineau at the most upscale restaurants. Spent an absolute ton of money, $12,566. $26,529 spent by the Canada Foundation for Innovation. They expensed taxpayers, meals, and drinks that added up to $26,529. The Business Development Bank's board, their directors billed $20,864 in meals in 2025. Why are we, as taxpayers, when money is tight, why are we paying for these bureaucrats to dine out at fancy restaurants and jack up the bill? Probably ordering things they never would have ordered if they were paying the bill themselves. But because it's on the taxpayer, they're going hog wild. This is completely preposterous. A few notes on this. Records show that the, let me see here. Let me get it exactly for you because I want to give you accurate information. Canada's Foundation for Innovation, according to the documents, spent $26,529 on board meeting meals in 2025 alone. They expensed over $4,200 each for a pair of receptions in Vancouver and Toronto, which, by the way, they held at the Hyatt Hotel. Records also show CEO Sylvain Charbonneau expensed $3,881 for a board meeting in December, described as a working dinner, lunch, and refreshments for 20 people at a downtown Ottawa hotel. 20 people, $4,000 bill. These people have no respect for our money. Wouldn't you love to go out to a nice steakhouse? Maybe you could if we don't pay as much in taxes, but we're paying a ridiculous amount in taxes. And these people are just wasting our money. What can we do about that? Well, we need to start putting more responsible people in government. That's all we can do. Because you know what? These aren't elected individuals. These are people that work for crown corporations, but the end result is the same. This is taxpayer money. So given that these people get appointed by the politicians that we elect, we've got to start electing better people that are responsible with money. That's a basic thing. If you're in a position of trust, like a member of government, and you're charged with spending taxpayer money responsibly, and you hire somebody who's getting paid a massive six-figure salary, and they're jacking us for $2,500 for one dinner, That's not right. I think there should be some accountability there. There's a good article on this from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation if you want to Google it, or it is in the Toronto Sun. Now I want to move on. Yesterday, Travis Dhanraj, former news person at Global News. When I worked at Chorus, he was there, but our paths never crossed, and that's too bad because I do like Travis. He left there, Global, and went to the CBC, but he wasn't there very long. You know, when it was announced that he was going to the CBC, I thought, wow, good for him. He's going to have a prime time, 8 o'clock political show. Well, he didn't have the best time, and yesterday he was in Ottawa answering questions from various politicians in this committee hearing. We're going to go one by one, question and answer. Listen to this, and keep in mind, this is our state broadcaster. We're paying billions for the CBC. And this is the sort of nonsense that's going on. Listen very carefully.
My first set of questions is going to go to Mr. Dhanraj. Mr. Dhanraj, I'm just curious. There was a document that you talked about in your opening remarks called Parameters for Political Guests. Would you be willing to table that with the committee?
I would.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciated. Now, I just want to get to the bottom of this. Can you talk a little bit about any pressure that you experienced at the CBC to shape stories in a particular fashion?
Sure, I can, but I do want to spend part of my time because I am here speaking and this is my story. But over the past several days, and even when this story initially came out, there have been other CBC employees, current and former, that have come forward to me that are afraid to speak out publicly. And they have sent me some statements. So I'd like to, if I can, read into the record some of what I have been getting from current and former employees. This is a current employee at the CBC. I've been with CBC for 10 years, and I've witnessed and experienced multiple incidents of the misuse of taxpayer dollars, racism, favoritism, nepotism, sexual harassment, and verbal abuse. And then she goes on to outline specific examples. This next individual was someone that you would all know if I said their name. They left the CBC after a 10-year career. The end of their statement says, without exaggeration, I experienced toxicity every single day, and it was almost always from the same people. It was not subtle. It was not hidden. It was part of the daily reality of working there. She goes on to say that she was set to interview Catherine Tate on air. I introduced myself to her in the makeup room as the host. In front of others, she responded, I didn't know I'd be interviewed by somebody who looks like she is 14. That moment stayed with me. It was dismissive, inappropriate, and reflected a broader culture in which respect was not always equally extended to everyone. On Mr. Cochrane, this is one of his former producers. His toxic behavior extended beyond editorial matters and was more often than not deeply hypocritical. While he publicly presented himself as a supporter of diversity, he actively undermined the contributions of colleagues who were minorities. This is somebody who left the industry and had to go to another country. After about a year of working there as an anchor, this is in Vancouver, I was suddenly removed from the anchor desk. I was told the decision was related to the color of my skin, that as a white person, I did not fit the diversity targets they were trying to meet. No concerns about my performance had ever been raised. My concern was the system and the reasoning behind the decision. My frustration was never directed at the individual who stepped into the role. She was also said that she was forced to check a box if somebody of a diverse background appeared on the air. And she said that that was concerning to her. I believe it's important to include a broad range of voices and perspectives, but reducing interview subjects to a checkbox felt like an overly simplistic way of approaching something that deserves much more care and thought. And I can go on.
We'll get back to Travis in just a second, and I find all that very fascinating, but frankly, I don't find it very surprising. There is a culture of entitlement at the CBC. They want as much money as possible, and they are not in the slightest going to be accountable for it. There are HR issues here, and I'm going to kind of characterize a lot of what Travis is saying here as human resources issues. But A, how familiar does that sound? Because there's a lot of folks who deal with stuff just like that in their workplace, and there's only one way to describe that. It's toxic. These diversity targets, wow. Someone was basically fired because they were white, and it didn't help them achieve their diversity target. A competent person who was good enough to get hired to be an anchor at the CBC. Run out of town because they're white. The head of the CBC, Catherine Tate, making such a snide, condescending comment to a person who's going to interview her. Wow, I didn't know I'd be being interviewed by someone who looks like they're 14. This is stuff that is not okay. We need to expect more from our state broadcaster. And frankly, what I've heard so far, not surprising. It should be surprising, but it's not. And it's pretty outrageous if you stop and think about it. Again, Canadian taxpayers are paying for this. And this is the sort of stuff that was going on at the CBC.
And it is shocking. These people have been traumatized. They are scared to come out. They are scared of the professional repercussions. And management, like Andre Lau, like Brodie Fenlon, like Kathy Perry, like Chris Carter, they are concerned about protecting the reputation of the organization as opposed to dealing with these issues when it comes to employees.
So, Mr. Dhanraj, during your time there, can you just outline what years were you there?
I was there. I finished at Global, I think in 2021. It's in the bio that I provided.
Oh, perfect.
And then I came to Ottawa. I was a parliamentary reporter. I flew around with the Prime Minister. I covered Parliament Hill. I went back to Toronto. I was on Marketplace. I covered the Queen's funeral. And then I got my own show, which I thought, I'd have some say in terms of how that show went. And on the intersection panel, this is a picture here of all the folks that we had on the panel. We've got here one with Raheem Mohammed and Rachel Gilmore. I don't know if you can get two people very far apart on the ideological spectrum. Is that Sheila Copps, Brian Lilly, and Faye Johnston, right? We were having the Canadian conversation, and this panel was canceled. And you also have issues of pay equity when it comes to all of these folks.
So obviously your point here was to create a panel that was full of diversity, not just in skin color or ethnicity or religious background, perhaps, but you wanted diversity of thought.
Correct.
Were you given the journalistic freedom then to move forward and do that for the sake of the Canadian public?
No, I mean, the issue became with the panelists. We had a list of 43 people or 45 people that Power and Politics gave us that said, do not go near these people, right? And some of these folks were like reporters, like Robert Benzie. There's a story breaking at Queen's Park, and we're on at 7:00. We should be able to call, somebody who covers Queen's Park and talk to them. But there were these continued hurdles and roadblocks that were set up to really have a certain group of folks in Ottawa in control of who was allowed on programs. Particularly mine was a concern. And there were repeated episodes of conservatives being blocked. I mean, I have the G chats right here. I said, in terms of getting folks on, that we need to have balance. It's not about just having a show with conservatives or just with liberals. But if Power and Politics is going to have liberals talking points on all the time, we should have balance as a network. And I said, we are in contravention of Section 11 I told Brodie Fenlon this, and also Andre Lau repeatedly. We are in contravention of the Broadcasting Act if we are not providing equitable time for all perspectives. So I don't want to flood the show with conservatives, but I do want to have balance. And there are, and this is all I can talk to my legal team, because some of this is before the Human Rights Commission in terms of how this happened. But there were repeated attempts over and over and over again. At one point, I heard, okay, well, maybe you can have NDP folks on, but conservatives are a no. It should blow the Canadian public's mind that this was the stuff that was going on.
Whew. Wow. One of the things that I try and do here on this podcast is I try and provide you what I think you're not getting from the mainstream media. And by the way, CBC certainly did not cover Travis's testimony yesterday. Neither did CTV. And I'm trying to figure out why. Because I thought CBC and CTV were competitors. You would think, oh, wow, here's a moment to make the CBC look bad. Here's a moment to expose to the Canadian people that CBC has very biased coverage. I thought that would have been a great opportunity for CTV. They're silent on this. Maybe CBC or CTV. Let me say that again. Maybe CTV. Maybe they've got some skeletons in their closet, too. Maybe we should be talking about them. But for now, we're talking about the CBC. One of the things that I just want so badly for Canadians to understand is this isn't like it used to be. Back in the day, you could turn on the 6 o'clock news or the national or the CTV national news or global national. You could turn on the news and expect to get a basic summary of all of the different relevant events from that day, all the things you need to know. And it would cover some nice feel-good stories. It would include some of the crime happening in the community, a little bit of politics, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It was a package of information so that you could watch it and be fairly informed on what's going on in the world. But somewhere along the line, likely when we started super funding journalism by the government, things got completely out of hand. And one of the things you need to remember when you're watching the news, it looks like the news, right? It looks like the news. There's an anchor there and they're showing clips and there's reporters on the street with cameras and microphones and they've got the graphics. It looks like the news and they even call it the news. They're not there to inform you anymore. They're there to create a narrative. They're there to try and narrate a narrative that they want out there or that somebody above them wants out there. They will do their level best to make the people they like look good and to make the people they don't like look bad. And let's be perfectly clear. The CBC does not like conservatives. They do like the Liberals. By the way, it's the Liberals who have been giving them epic amounts of taxpayer dollars over the last number of years. This isn't a conspiracy theory anymore. I think most people, and maybe this is because we're somewhat removed from it, most people can tell that if you watch CNN in America, you're getting a very liberal view of America. When you watch Fox News, you're getting a very right view of America, or conservative view, Republican view. The news isn't supposed to have a bias. It's supposed to just inform you, give you the information you need, and let you form your own opinion. But that's out. All bets are off. You know, and there's a lot of people, particularly older folks, boomers in particular, and some Gen X, that have just grown up this way. They've just known that you can watch the news and trust the news. The news doesn't lie. And you know what? Sometimes they do. But in the vast majority of cases, they're not necessarily lying, but they're leading you a certain way. And unless you realize these people are trying to hoodwink me, then you're just going to fall for it, hook, line, and sinker. It's not as much news as it is a story, and the news people are narrating that story because they want you to come to their conclusion. Let's hear more of Travis Dhanraj.
The CBC does talk about being diverse, inclusive, fair, and balanced, yet one of the CBC's premier segments is something called At Issue, which features Toronto Star journalist Chantal Hebert, Athila Raj, and Globe and Mail journalist Andrew Coyne. In what universe is this diverse, fair, or balanced as a news panel?
Well, I mean, the national makes their own decisions, I suppose, in terms of who they put on that panel. And it's Rosie's panel, so Miss Barton's panel. So I guess you can have to talk to her about the editorial decisions. But what I was attempting to do on this program was have that diversity of opinion. And when they canceled the panel, I sent in a note to panelists asking for feedback, and I was disciplined for that. And I just want to talk about this NDA that I got because it's important. Because I was raising concerns about editorial, and I was slapped with this NDA here, which is a practice that the CBC is using frequently, which was raised by Dave Seglins, and you guys all have the paper. Dhanraj has considered whether he has a human rights complaint with respect to the issues in dispute, and by his signature below confirms that he does not. Further, he confirms that he seeks no right or remedy under the Canadian Human Rights Act as amended with respect to the issues in dispute, and any such claim is barred by this agreement. That should be shocking to every member on this committee. And I hope that other members on the committee take an interest in terms of the issues that I'm outlining here, because it is very important. We should not have a public institution silencing their own employees and having them waive their rights under the Canadian Human Rights Act. That should be shocking.
Getting back to the bigger issue of the fairness and balance in news, you mentioned at one point that CBC management actually prevented you from interviewing conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on your show. Can you describe what happened there?
Yeah, well, I basically wasn't allowed to pick up the phone and talk to conservatives. I have some G chats here, which I just want to, read you part of this. I'm talking to my senior producer. I'm saying, okay, this is an editorial discussion. Can we get a conservative perspective on this is essentially what I'm saying. It is a no to the conservatives, I'm told. We can't chase anyone from the entire party. The chase is with PNP. So if Power and Politics is not able to secure a conservative or somebody that presents an alternate perspective, then we are not allowed to. I'm told at one point, we're sure that there's a myriad of other types of interesting guests that you can chase outside of the conservatives. Can I be included on conversations with Power and Politics? That's not how we work. I say to management, by playing petty office politics, we feed into conservative narratives that we have a bias against them. Canada Tonight is a melting pot of news of the day, and politics and decisions from it largely impact Canadians. So we need flexibility to respond to emerging stories. So yes, I wasn't even allowed to pick up the phone and call to request Pierre Poilievre. Look at what happened when I had Melissa Lantsman on my show. Right? I was threatened to be pulled off the air, which CBC then said in a news statement they didn't threaten to do that. There are recordings of them trying to do this.
Why do you think they were doing that?
I mean, there's an effort to essentially protect those in Ottawa in terms of their perspectives on these things, in terms of who they want on the show. It should be about, we did an interview with Karen Johnson, my co-host on the new podcast I'm doing. It is out right now. She's another former CBC employee that is talking about the toxic culture. She said that she alleges that she was called a brown Barbie, a bimbo, but she says that it's a very high school culture. And these are things that this is fine. If you have hosts doing that, it's not fine, but okay. But management, you are responsible for dealing with it. And so if management is not going to do anything, if the president of the CBC is going to come here and expect a tongue lashing and then be able to go back to the CBC and continue to get funding without accountability, these practices will continue. So shame is clearly not enough to get the CBC to a place where they will hold themselves accountable. So it's incumbent upon this committee to do that.
Wow, just explosive stuff here from Travis Dhanraj, who again was speaking to a parliamentary committee yesterday. He did mention Karen Johnson. You might remember Karen if you watched any CBC. Karen did release an audio or a video statement, and I want to play that for you. It's about 1 minute and 41 seconds long. This is another CBC employee that's talking about the same thing, the culture at the CBC, the way they treat employees. Now, this one isn't specifically about the CBC's bias, but this is something that you should know. We're paying for this.
So when you're hired, if I don't know if anybody knows this, when you're hired at CBC or any other sort of newsroom, you have a 9-month probation. During that 9 months, things should be brought up to you if there's concerns or what have you. That usually what happens. I was actually days to my probation being over when I got called in to say that I wasn't standing in the right place, of a weathered green screen, which I've been doing for 25 years. I wasn't giving accurate information, but I've never had a complaint about my information. So all this started to tag on. I was humiliated in the newsroom when I was told to not go into studio, told to wait. I was berated. I was screamed at, and then told, what am I going to make things better to improve the situation? A situation that I didn't even cause. I was just doing what I was told to do. Things like that. I got written up for having a thick eyeliner on my makeup, on my face. And we had makeup artists who did our makeup. So that was a comment I had gotten from an executive producer. She's nice, but she wears too much eyeliner. Out of my hands. I was called a bimbo on day 10, that I sounded like a bimbo on the air. That was one of the criticisms that I had received. I'd never been called that in my life, even a brown Barbie, which was not great.
Was that from someone who supervised you?
Yes, that was actually my producer.
Wow. Brown Barbie. This is lingo that's being used by executives at the CBC against their employees. What would happen in the private sector if you weren't protected by the government of the day, making sure that you've got a guaranteed job and you really can't lose it? What would happen in the private sector if you called one of your employees Brown Barbie or a bimbo? Wouldn't end well for you, would it? These CBC employees seem to have been scared at the time to lose their jobs. Now that they've lost their jobs, I guess it's fair game. Go ahead and tell. I'm glad these people are telling their story. We deserve to know these things. The CBC is Canada's state broadcaster. It is funded with taxpayer dollars. And despite it being funded by taxpayer dollars, they still sell advertising and compete with private sector broadcasters. And this is the sort of nonsense that's going on at the CBC. I'm going to do one last round of Travis Dhanraj. I think this is stuff that we got to hear, everyone.
Mr. Dhanraj, I'm just curious, in your other remarks, or your previous remarks, I should say, sorry, you mentioned that there was a blacklist of, I think you said 45 people who were not permitted to appear on the CBC, and that this list came down from management. Would you be willing to table that list with committee today?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dhanraj, I'm curious, during your time, or do you have knowledge of the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, ever talking to the CBC with regard to how a news angle should be covered or taken, or content that should be reported on?
I know concerns were raised. From people that were on Power and Politics. I have documentation related to those concerns being raised. And I know that the folks that raise these concerns, they're fearful of, exactly the same thing that all these other folks are fearful of, right? Professional reprisal. But I also know that this was raised repeatedly. And whether or not there was influence from the former Prime Minister's office in terms of editorial decisions that were being made on Power and Politics or not, even the allegation of that on its face needs to be investigated. And from my understanding, and CBC can put out a statement correcting me if I'm wrong on this, I don't think that there was ever an investigation. That is a serious concern, right? I mean, if there are repeated, allegations made about perhaps there's too much influence here. Now, let me just say this as well. I was a reporter in Ottawa. I've been at Queen's Park. I was the Queen's Park bureau chief for Global. Reporters have sources. We all know that. But there's a line where that leads into editorial decision-making, and you have to make sure that that is clear. And if there's even an allegation that may have been crossed, you have to look deeper.
Well, I guess to that end then, we know that public trust for the media in general is on the decline. We know that that is true with the CBC. There's no exception there. In your mind then, is that lack of trust justified?
I think that right now, the CBC, by continuing to put out statements and to come to these committees and say, we might have a little bit of a problem, but overall, we're not biased. That's gaslighting Canadians. Canadians can see that this is an issue, right? And this is folks have accused me of coming here being a cheerleader for the Conservatives. I am not a cheerleader for the Conservatives. I'm sorry. I'm not a cheerleader for the Liberals either. I was trying to do my job as a journalist, and part of that is being balanced. And so when you have, when I was pulled into these disciplinary meetings, I was told that it was editorializing because I put that Catherine Tate wouldn't come on the program, and it's unfortunate. This is unfortunate, was editorializing, right? And was perceived bias. There's a lot of perceived bias going on that I don't see any discipline around. So I think CBC needs to have a wake-up call here in terms of accountability. And really, that's incumbent upon this committee. I have made recommendations. There are 11 recommendations in terms of how to, move some of this forward. When it came to Mr. Cochrane, this is during the convoy, for example. We were talking about Tamara Litch, who was an individual who was involved in the convoy. We were doing a story around that. And off the hand remarks can be made at times. And I said, I think that she has a couple of different last names. People who live in trailers usually do. Okay, off-color remark. But if this is a pattern, right, you have to, if your staff on your own show are raising this, if people are leaving the program, you have to look a little bit deeper into it, as opposed to pulling me off the air for saying it's unfortunate the president didn't come on the show.
So the Canadian public is paying for this to the tune of about $1.4 billion. And then, of course, the government also increased that by an additional $150 million. At the end of the day, then, the public is the shareholder and also the ones that are supposed to be benefiting from this news coverage. In your estimation, what changes are needed to actually restore that trust?
Well, I think that there needs to be an overhaul when it comes to management. You have my specific recommendations, but I will also say this. I am not here as somebody who does not believe in public broadcasting. I was on Jonavision. I started as an audience coordinator when I was 19 years old at the CBC. I worked on the Air Farce. I worked on the Red Green Show. I then left. I came back. I worked at CBC Edmonton. I worked at CBC Toronto. Left. Came back again. I took a pay cut to come back to the CBC. I used to walk around the CBC Broadcast Center when I was 19 years old and sneak into the newsroom. And I thought, I want to be at this place at some point. This is the heart of this building, the news organization. And it has gotten so far away from what it was. The CBC should not be a polarizing force. It needs to bring Canadians together, and it has the infrastructure to be able to do that. But until there's a recognition of the problem from management, nothing will happen. And they fail to recognize this. I would be willing to sit down tomorrow with the new president to talk about some of this stuff, right? But good people are leaving. They're being forced out, and their concerns are being dismissed because it's about protecting reputation. Well, here's some news. I don't have to be wanting to destroy the CBC because management and executives are doing a great job of that on their own.
Mic drop, right? Travis Dhanraj talking yesterday to a committee in Ottawa about some of the faults at the CBC. I do think that Travis probably does have fairly good journalist instincts. I do think that he is very similar to me in the sense that he feels an obligation to present the news in as much of an unbiased way as possible, and where that's not possible, to at least declare your bias. I think Travis and I are on the same page there, but him and I are going to disagree on what needs to happen in order for trust to be restored in the CBC. He says new management. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but we can go a lot further too. Defunding the CBC or fully funding the CBC, but taking away their ability to sell advertising, that would be a huge step forward. The entire broadcast system needs an overhaul because I've got news for Travis. It's not just the CBC. This is happening with private broadcasters as well, and it's happening across all ends of the spectrum. Radio, television, digital, they're all dealing with it. And part of the problem here is when we don't have those trusted sources of news where you can turn on the national newscast and be confident that you're being given unbiased information by unbiased reporters and you can make up your own mind. When we can't rely on that, that's how misinformation, disinformation starts to circulate. That's how narratives form on social media. That's where conspiracy theories come from. And in a lot of cases, people are, when they're put in a corner, you either believe what you read on X or you believe what you saw on the CBC. People are starting to turn away from the CBC. They just don't believe them anymore. And not just the CBC, a lot of mainstream media broadcasters. There has to be a level of trust, and that's going to include massive reforms and full coverage. You know, a simple thing off the top of my head that could be done. Let me give you an example. How many times have you watched the news and it looks like the news and they've got the graphics and there's that thing along the bottom that says breaking news and there's headlines on the screen and sports on the screen, but the content they're showing you, 3 talking heads with 1 interviewer, and they're all saying the same thing. Conservative, bad, liberal, good. That's not unbiased. But to the average person, they think, oh, wow, it seems like everybody is opposed to this. All of the so-called experts on TV seem to think the conservatives are bad and the liberals are good. That's not representative of the people or the sentiment out in the public. It's not. There is no balance to that. But because it's being presented to you in a segment where you should trust the experts, and here's what the experts all have to say, and they're all saying the same thing, you're inclined to believe it. When there's no balance, it's just propaganda. And the average person doesn't understand that that's happening. So here's a simple thing. When the news is playing news, when they're there to truly just inform you, they should go ahead and say news. They should also specify if it's live or pre-recorded news. When it's commentary, all of the news type stuff should come off the screen and it should say in bold, this is an opinion piece. This is an editorial. This is not news. This is someone's opinion. That would be a simple thing to help Canadians differentiate between news and opinion. When you present opinion as news, you're again hitting people with propaganda, and it's wrong. I could go on all day. I've got a lot to say on this topic, but friends, that's my time. Thank you for checking out this episode of Scott Fox After 9. I appreciate you. If you know someone who is buying what the CBC is selling, they fall for it hook, line, and sinker. They watch that stupid ad issue panel on Thursday nights and they think, wow, Chantel and Andrew and Althea, they're great and they're just telling me the way it is. There's some smart people telling me the truth. They're giving you their version of the truth. They're narrating something to try and get you to one common conclusion. They're not giving you an unbiased discussion where all viewpoints are represented. And to be honest, it's getting worse every day. Friends, tomorrow, I've got a lot to talk about. In fact, there's lots that I didn't even get to today. I had a few things from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who does not get equal time on the CBC, by the way. Yesterday, Pierre had a great announcement about trying to remove some of the interprovincial trade barriers. Here's somebody who's going out trying to solve Canada's problems. He was over in Europe trying to convince them to buy oil and LNG. He's here in Canada pointing out we still have these interprovincial trade barriers that we're supposed to be ripping down to make Canada a better place, to make us our own best customer. Barely got any coverage yesterday on the news, and unfortunately, I don't have time to do it today. So if I have time, I'll squeeze it in tomorrow. There is one thing breaking as I wrap up this episode. The Prime Minister has apparently spoken outside the House of Commons. He is finally talking about his latest MP to cross the floor from the New Democrats. Here is Prime Minister Carney talking about his new MP.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I'm very honored to welcome Lori to our caucus. It is a great pleasure. One of Canada's greatest constituency MPs. You represent a riding that is the size of Mexico. And very down to earth, and we've had conversations about what we can do, both large and small, in Nunavut. Large projects, but also helping everyone get ahead. So all for Canada, Canada for all.
So, you know, Mark Carney is all smiles here. Mark Carney was not given a majority mandate. He is going to steal it. He is going to buy and wheel and deal what he can, because as long as he's Prime Minister, he can continue signing deals which benefit Brookfield. He can continue doing that. This is a blank check for him. Majority government, we're going to lose a lot of money. A lot of tax dollars are going to flee this country, and they're going to end up in Brookfield, which is now headquartered in America. You don't even have to question me on that. You want to fact check it? Do it. You know how much Brookfield has benefited from Mark Carney being prime minister? He's not going anywhere, not anytime soon. They will do whatever they have to do to stay in power and keep the money train going. Friends, on that, I'll see you tomorrow and leave you right now with the sounds of Pat James and the whole truth. Hey now.